He found himself in a place he couldn't explain, unsure of why he had been brought there. Survival forced him into the life of a mercenary. The cycle continued, cutting down enemies simply to avoid death. It was a relentless rhythm, repeating one struggle after another. A forceful shout pierces the sudden silence, commanding a rapid awakening. A menacing voice warns that death will find them in any moment of hesitation, cautioning them not to let their guard down even for a second on the battlefield. With immediate urgency, a command is given to sound the charge. The command echoes out, addressing all the troops with a unified call to advance. A powerful cry of charge rings through the air. The speaker continues, voicing the single thing they truly hope for right now. The first words echoing through the silence were a proclamation of survival. They had done it again. A character began to observe the situation, murmuring a challenge and a question. The concern deepened, shifting to a careful observation of his handsome face, hoping that no part of him was truly harmed. The character paused, uttering a simple question before noticing something profound. Rain. A sudden shout drew attention, calling out to Aaron. The voice expressed an appreciation for the rain, then suggested that once the war was over, they should head east. The surrounding area was noted to be heavily rained upon. A plea was made not to be forgotten, followed by a wistful acknowledgement of the abundance of rain. A frantic series of shouts erupted, calling out a safe path while others yelled to hasten their pace. The urgency was palpable as the group was reminded that capturing their target before he escaped the castle walls was an absolute necessity, and they acknowledged the command with quick obedience. Suddenly, multiple voices called out the title captain, signaling that someone had arrived and attracting the attention of the leadership. One individual questioned where the rest of their comrades were, to which another responded that they would be arriving shortly. A chorus of voices quickly condemned Hans, questioning how such a mild-mannered individual could cause so much trouble. They suggested that the person knew he had been problematic since the very beginning. One speaker added that, despite his apparent composure, Hans was actually a mage. A warning quickly followed, cautioning that a mage could never be trusted. The accusations grew louder, with one individual suggesting that Hans must have formed a contract with a demon. The word demon was repeated in the heated exchange, escalating the mystery of his origins. However, the accusations shifted, with one person dismissing the concerns as mere jealousy. They suggested that this resentment stemmed from Hans taking away a desirable title that should have belonged to them. A sudden surge of anger erupted, marked by shouts denying any wrongdoing, followed quickly by another character, suggesting that the speaker had never been considered handsome. The confrontation ended with a sharp burst of fury. Suddenly, a different focus emerged as someone questioned where the person was going, urging them to head back to headquarters. The discussion shifted, with someone mentioning that Hans's nickname might change. The person who brought up the possibility questioned this suggestion, affirming the change. Another person mused that a new nickname might become something like Dead, but still handsome. A soft hum passed through the air, indicating a moment of consideration. The speaker mused that the individual would likely meet a swift end if apprehended. Before concluding with a clear identification of their location, the Outer Ward Guard's headquarters at Kassadok Castle. A warning was issued, suggesting that the character was too late for something. The name Captain Aaron was then called out, followed by a more detailed announcement recognizing Manuel as the commander of the Outer Ward Guards. The character offered a casual excuse, admitting they had simply been asleep. This was met with an audible HMPH of exasperation. The conversation then shifted focus, with the speaker noting that they had heard the character was once quite close with Hans, who was known as a criminal. The question hung heavy in the air, demanding confirmation of those claims. The response started with a reluctant affirmation, suggesting the truth was only partially true. The speaker then excitedly addressed a character named Aaron, painting Hans as exceptionally bright, the kind of talent rarely seen in these uncivilized times. They recounted how they remained close even after Hans had joined the Magic Academy, but a pause followed, indicating something significant had shifted between them. However, the current speaker quickly dismissed that narrative. They insisted their interactions were merely casual encounters when paths crossed. Ultimately, they concluded by stating that admitting anything more about their past relationship was simply not ideal for them at this moment. A subtle shift in the atmosphere was immediately apparent. The other party questioned this notion, receiving a curt acknowledgement before the focus shifted entirely to the grave nature of the situation. They asserted that what had transpired was not merely a minor offense. In fact, the crime involved more than just a common thief. It had direct ties to the daughter of a prominent lord. And furthermore, the boy was accused of stealing something irreplaceable that could never be allowed to leave her possession. The suggestion was made that if the Cassatic guards were to move, their purpose would be clear to apprehend the individual responsible for committing such a profoundly heinous crime. The suggestion was concluded with an emphatic statement, predicting that such actions would greatly satisfy Lord Fulputz. The character then pressed the point, questioning if his intent was fully grasped, before issuing a direct command to bring the criminal, whether living or deceased. Another individual promised to do their utmost, but then raised a critical concern about the potential involvement of the lord of the castle. The exasperation was palpable, making the moment feel intensely frustrating. The speaker confessed that because of Hans, they felt as if losing their composure was a constant threat. However, they quickly shifted the focus, announcing the assembly of Team 4 from the Cassatic Outer Guards. They finished their statement by addressing the individual with a formal title, referring to them as captain. The conversation shifted, with one individual noting how strange the magic areas seemed to him. Another voiced strong concern regarding Hans, questioning why he might be hiding out in Sector 7 and pointing out just how dirty the location was. Acknowledging the situation, a second concern was raised regarding the poor health and weak stomach of the young man. Amidst the worried exchanges, someone suggested that since they wouldn't want to walk around in the rain where there wasn't even proper facilities, perhaps we should fake a thorough search and then treat themselves to some beer somewhere else. A sharp voice abruptly commanded them to shut up and spread out, which was immediately followed by a subdued agreement from the group. A deep sigh of exasperation escapes him, labeling the locals as medieval imbeciles. He expresses disbelief that even when faced with death themselves, they still only care about booze. One character observes the previous exchange with a simple, questioning sound. Suddenly, a voice calls out to someone clad in a brown hood. The speaker identifies themselves as being from the outer guards and demands that the hooded figure remove their hood for a moment. No narration required, as this scene contains no dialogue or art description. The hooded figure murmurs, acknowledging the passage of time and speaking about a long time since seeing someone. A whisper follows, naming the person in question Aaron. A voice suddenly mocks the timing of events. Another, more distinct voice responds with a similar mocking tone. A sharp cry of frustration and pain erupts, signaling a struggle or impact. The accusation follows, directed at someone for their supposed betrayal and referencing a previous encounter where they were caught. The accuser makes it clear that something needs to be rectified. The person accused defensively denies the allegations, clarifying that they are not the individual implied. They then assert their true identity as a local apothecary and explain that their current presence is only due to being robbed, prompting them to report the incident to the proper authorities. A realization dawns on the assailant, who remarks that it is no wonder the apothecary looked so familiar. The apothecary then shouts in frustration, challenging the person for having struck him so violently in the first place. The man groans, muttering that the day has turned out to be utterly wretched. He complains loudly that not only was his entire stock of Hemo's herbs stolen, but he is now being physically assaulted by a guard captain for no discernible reason. The assailant pauses, wondering why the thief would steal something as common as Hemo's herbs. He then seems to notice something and calls out a warning. The assailant voiced a reminder that Hemo's herbs are vital for stopping bleeding, then called out directions, questioning which way the herb thief had fled. The name Hans was called out, echoing in the tense atmosphere. A chilling voice echoed, criticizing the current state of things as a considerable mess. The speaker continued, observing that the character had once been so clean and meticulous. This comparison was starkly delivered when they pointed out the current reality: the target was missing an arm, and seemingly on the run the message was clear: it was all over. A final ultimatum was issued, demanding that the person come out while they still had the chance. An overwhelming sense of denial echoed, suggesting that the character simply could not endure or accept what was happening at that moment. The intense emotion seemed to block out all further thoughts and resistance. A sudden outburst caused a flurry of shock, pointing out the massive spell forming. There was immediate concern regarding whether the storm or the intense rain contributed to this incredible magical manifestation. Addressing someone named Aaron, a character offered an apology, quickly followed by a declaration that they could not afford to be discovered just yet. A refusal echoed, demanding that the confrontation was not over yet. Another firm denial followed, emphasizing that the events were far from concluded. The narrative then shifts, suggesting the arrival or mention of a new case concerning LVHI. The focus shifts, leaving the audience with a moment of tense anticipation. A sudden surge of confidence emerges, as one person vows to overcome the mage with superior strength. The tension builds to a critical point, leaving the reader waiting for the action. Facing immense pressure, a character attempts to channel another spell. With visible strain, they struggle to pronounce the incantation El Nina, showing that even in desperation, maintaining control is difficult. Their desperate attempts are immediately interrupted by a sharp, commanding sound, silencing the magical turmoil. The confrontation escalates sharply. A name, Hands, is yelled out in urgency, followed by a broader exclamation directed at the mages themselves, signaling that this conflict will not be easily dismissed. The words chanted by the mages appeared to wield a mysterious kind of power, followed by an urgent plea that sounded like a desperate call for a brother. A questioning, yet pleading voice asked if his life was being spared by Aaron. The speaker then brought up whispers about a contract made with the E-demon. The speaker's voice dripped with suspicion, suggesting that if the rumored contract was true, a physical scar should mark the person's chest. They challenged the character, pointing out the pristine skin. The character, however, noticed that the chest area was completely spotless. This observation led the speaker to press their accusation even further, questioning why such a heinous act would be committed if the character had never been marked by any demon. The character responded with a veil of mystery, stating that the listener would not understand the full story, but rather that it was something they felt compelled to do. They ended their defense with a cryptic assurance one day understanding would arrive. A moment of exasperated disbelief filled the air, as if the absurdity of the situation was too much to bear. The character explained the item, revealing it was a healing potion. Then, with clear intent, they instructed the listener to stop acting childishly and follow them. A profound hesitation followed, as the character questioned whether the cost of losing an arm for merely stealing something was truly a fair price. This internal conflict quickly evolved into a realization that, while the cost was debatable, it was not up to them to make such a decision. The final thought settled in, emphasizing the harsh reality of the time and placed the wretched medieval world. The message delivered was chillingly stark. One could only be either completely innocent or condemned to death. A dismissal was given, demanding that the speaker simply leave the area. A heartbroken plea was then offered, calling out the word brother. The intense atmosphere quickly deteriorated when a voice sharply demanded that the notion of brother cease, urging the person to get away. The speaker offered a seemingly grateful thanks, followed by an urgent and singular request for someone named Aaron. A commanding voice then warned that this specific area was the only one left, emphasizing the need to search every single nook and cranny. The intense tone shifted as a stern warning was issued, demanding that the person cease calling them by the title brother. The hidden voice harshly condemned the individual, calling them a filthy pervert. A gasp of shock was followed by disbelief, as someone questioned the origin and ownership of the displayed undergarment. A sudden exclamation of frustration broke the silence. Someone vehemently accused Hands, calling him a small rat. Panic began to set in as the individuals realized they had no idea where he might have fled. The search quickly escalated, encompassing every corner of the entire Casadic castle, looking for someone not too shabby for a scoundrel like Hands. The desperation led them to call out for Kel, a former handsome member of the Outer Guards. One person suggests that since the man is a mage, he must have used some kind of escape magic. Following this thought, they identify Brig as the little brother from Team 4 of the Outer Guards. A different voice cautions against being naive, questioning why if magic solved everything, the man wouldn't just reattach his own arm. This line of thought leads to Poole, identified as the Snake Eyes from Team 4 of the Outer Guards, who then seems to offer a reluctant agreement. A desperate plea to keep the voices quiet is heard, followed by identifying Quarter Sleepyhead, who also belongs to Team 4 of the Outer Guards. A desperate voice admitted to having slept for less than 5 hours over the past 3 days, claiming that exhaustion made him feel like he might collapse. However, another person swiftly dismissed those concerns, assuring him that lack of sleep was not a cause for death. A moment of realization followed, with the speaker considering if perhaps the other individual genuinely was in danger. A hesitant acknowledgement was made, followed by a reminder that the discussion centered on Quarter. It was further recalled that Quarter had actually vomited the day before, mentioning how extremely drowsy he felt. Suddenly, the discussion came to a firm close. Everyone was advised that the search efforts were over, and it was time for everyone to rest. One individual then addressed the group, acknowledging a person by name. He further ascertained if this newly recognized character was Aaron, the captain of Team 4 within the Outer Guards. The man revealed his name was William and offered a polite greeting, expressing that it was a pleasure to meet the group. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, pointing out that William was not just anyone. He was revealed to be the chief and held the ultimate authority over the entire Cassatic Guard, a man who possessed the power to have whomever they were speaking with executed or confined deep within the dungeons. The chief then began to zero in on the individuals, referencing connections. He mentioned hearing that they had been close with Hans, the infamous criminal. His scrutiny deepened as he added another point, noting that they had independently conducted the final search of Sector 7 by themselves. A demanding voice pressed the matter, questioning why nothing had been discovered in that specific area. The response suggested that this was the sole sector overlooked by his inner guards. Deflating the concern, a statement was made that all he managed to find within that sector amounted only to feces. A thoughtful hum drifted through the air, setting a deceptively casual tone. The commanding officer then addressed the man, prompting a sharp and respectful affirmation in response. Next, the individual brought up the cigarettes that had been gifted to him, praising their exceptionally refined flavor while maintaining a dismissive tone. A scoff escaped the person, questioning how such premium goods were obtained on meager wages. The man quickly stammered out an explanation that they were received as a gift from a distant relative. A challenging tone filled the air as suspicion immediately rose, questioning if those goods had been acquired through theft or embezzlement. The man's attempts to defend his possession were fraught with palpable discomfort and quick denials. The accuser leaned forward, demanding that everyone listen closely to a serious warning. They cautioned that if anyone were to commit or even aid in a transgression, or abet a crime within the grand halls of the Cassatic Castle, there would be swift and severe consequences. The menacing voice declared that these individuals would perish by the narrator's own hands. A cold warning was issued, ensuring that the target would remember this moment vividly. The scene ended with an ominous period, leaving the tension hanging in the air. With a sharp affirmation, the character accepted the given order. Another voice offered warm parting wishes, advising caution and wishing the captain a good night. The character merely nodded in acknowledgement, responding with a casual agreement. The narrative shifts, emphasizing the brutal nature of the era, describing a period marked by complete lack of civil rights and continuous interrogation. A moment of exasperated thought surfaces, directed toward someone named Hans, describing him as a fool. The speaker muses that while the person in question managed to escape detection, they did so safely. Suddenly, a sharp cry rings out, immediately followed by a sound of confusion and surprise. The initial outburst was sharp, questioning their motives. The voices insisted that they could not simply leave the place, suggesting that the owner of the inn was a fine young woman who deserved to be kept nearby. But the inn owner, Hannah of the Happy Kanai Inn, was resolute. She demanded to be released, standing firm in her conviction and announcing her identity. A third voice interjected, cautioning for a gentler approach. The speaker spoke quietly to Dylan, making sure he remembered his gentlemanly manners before calling out the name of a character. Later, another conversation began, noting that the lady might be led astray. The individuals reasoned that since they had not been in the neighborhood for long, they simply wanted to make some new local friends. The playful banter escalated, making the casual idea of a new acquaintance sound far more appealing when that suggestion involved an intimate night out. A sudden shift in tone signaled the arrival of an authority figure. This person observed the group and warned them, perceiving them as mercenaries from another region. They cautioned that if their behavior continued to escalate, things would become highly troublesome and chaotic. A voice warned them, questioning why they felt the need to continue escalating the situation. A dangerous thought crossed one person's mind, suggesting the consequences could be even worse than imagined. Confused by the intensity of the situation, one character demanded to know what the other planned next. One character chuckled dismissively, suggesting that the presence of castle guards was a fanciful thought. implying such protectors would never bother with this particular location. The other individual elaborated on how guarding a modest, remote inn like this was seemingly beneath the notice of the main forces. The conversation momentarily ceased, allowing the weight of their careless remarks to hang in the air. A sudden gasp echoed through the space, drawing all attention to a surprise arrival. The realization dawned that the newcomer was, indeed, Aaron, suggesting a connection to their current predicament. The scene remained silent, leaving the implications of Aaron's identity hanging in the air. A subtle, numbered graphic appears before the characters. A sharp sound of annoyance punctures the tense atmosphere, suggesting a dismissive reaction from one of the characters. The moment concludes with a passage of time, allowing the residual tension to settle over the group. A span of time passed, marking a stretch of 10 days. Time progressed again, reaching a count of 5. The surprise quickly dawned that the number of foes was considerably lower than it had been previously. A figure addressed someone, noting that because they held the title of Captain of the Guards, it was expected that such matters would be handled responsibly. The count moved on to 9 days, followed by the declaration that the Captain of the Guards was currently off duty. As time continued to dwindle toward 6 days, a cold and cruel voice interrupted the conversation, sneering at the individuals with dismissive contempt. A voice suddenly erupted, calling someone a filthy little rat, followed by the pronouncement of 8 days passing. The person speaking then challenged the other, questioning how bold they were to look away from them. The challenged person, in turn, responded by reminding the aggressor of their manner of speech. They criticized it as a distasteful medieval habit. The focus of the conversation shifted as one character called out a name Hannah. Finally, an offer was made to stay free and receive dinner for 6 days at the speaker's expense. This announcement was met with a frustrated cry. A moment of shocked disbelief crossed the character's face, leading to a simple utterance of surprise. This initial shock quickly morphed into a defeated resignation, marked by a frustrated acceptance of whatever was happening. The frustration deepened as the character managed a muttered acknowledgement of the situation, which was immediately followed by an eruption of pain and distress. The sudden, intense physical pain seemingly overwhelmed the character completely. A thought crossed the character's mind, filled with a determination to teach these medieval people a hard lesson. A sharp cry of agony tore through the air as the confrontation began. The character seemed to shout out a declaration, marking the dramatic start of a new phase. The speaker declared that there were no bad medieval folks, suggesting a completely different reality was unfolding. Instead, the speaker pointed out that there were plenty of people who hadn't been beaten enough times to learn a lesson. They continued, stating that with every punch they received, these individuals would learn to become better people. The sequence of thoughts paused, leaving the audience to process the weight of these strange and determined words. Suddenly, shouts erupt filled with enthusiasm. Exclamations of encouragement are directed toward a character named Aaron, and there is excitement about getting another round for Hannah. The group further reveals the deep reason for their consistent visits to the Happy Kanai. It is due to a monster that resides within that very place. The tone grows increasingly dramatic as they label themselves followers of a berserk, roguish guard. They characterize the target opponent as the top human trash exterminator from Kassadok, shouting demands to attack and smash him around. A voice, emanating from the background, muttered that the antics of those individuals were tiresome imbeciles. The speaker mused aloud about wanting to set them straight at some point. Suddenly, a distinct voice cut through the noise with a simple address. The attention then focused on the person in question. One figure questioned if they were about to reveal something small, a tone of anticipation hanging in the air. A sharp exclamation of protest followed immediately, a frantic declaration to a superior figure. The sound of a commanding voice echoed through the area, announcing that Captain Aaron of the Outer Guards, specifically from Team 4, was officially dismissed for the day. The atmosphere settled into a tense quiet, leaving the characters in an uncomfortable pause. A sudden realization prompted a forceful question about the protagonist's identity. After some thought, one of the speakers offered a suggestion, proposing that his name might be Aaron. A warning was then delivered, commanding the character never to look back as he moved forward. The transition was seamless, leaving the character to simply continue his path. He reflected that it had already been 6 years since he woke up in this strange world. A weariness settled over him, wondering how long he could sustain this routine once again. The only thing he knew was the pursuit of flawless swordsmanship. One character expressed surprise, noting that it was rare to find someone of such caliber in a remote location like Kassadek. The opponent was revealed to be wearing armor engraved with the E crest of the House of Fenner. Furthermore, they were equipped with rapiers shaped like a spiral. A sudden burst of frustration led the protagonist to exclaim about this bastard. It was then revealed that the rival figure was, in fact, a knight. Their lives are centered around a primal conflict. They fight against demons. Suddenly, whispers spread. Since the figure possesses the crest of House Fenner, they must surely be a knight hailing from Bold Castle, which is known to be quite distant. This realization prompts confusion. Why would such an individual find himself in Kassadek? A deeper question surfaced among the onlookers. Perhaps he had been dispatched here by the Empire itself. A voice suddenly broke the silence, suggesting there was no need for such caution. The speaker followed up by claiming they were merely admiring an impressive display of swordsmanship. The other characters then began to question the individual's allegiance, asking about their knightly order. Before they could proceed with questioning, a sudden call-out interrupted them, shouting out a name, Sir Ben. A sharp cry followed, indicating that the person had been spotted exactly where they were thought to be. A woman's outburst questioned why her own personal guard would abandon her. The scene then revealed her identity: Vivian Fulputz, the sole daughter of House Fulputz and the Lord of Kassadek Castle. A deeper confrontation immediately followed, addressing an unknown entity with a sharp command to stop. The voice reminded the other person that they had been in the middle of a conversation. The focus shifted to calling out the identity of a guard, Captain Aaron, belonging to the Outer Guards Team 4. A voice of polite service chimed out, confirming dedication to Lady Vivian. A sudden burst of giggling broke the atmosphere as a playful greeting was directed at Captain Aaron. The speaker mentioned hearing that he had endured considerable trouble because of an earlier incident involving undergarments, quickly following up with flustered apologies for that past event. Responding to the address, someone reassured her that it was nothing at all. The person then raised a pointed question: why was a knight from Bold escorting Lady Vivian? Suddenly, a panicked outburst echoed out that they needed to leave immediately. The reason given was the alarming realization that Sir Ben appeared to have interrupted their precious training session. The group shifted, and one individual offered praise to Captain Aaron for his excellent efforts in keeping Kassadek safe. An unexpected question followed. Voiced with surprise, was the man they were observing truly only a guard captain? A sudden thought surfaced, expressing confusion at the situation. The observer then voiced a firm conviction, stating that they were absolutely certain the individual was in fact a knight. Silence hung in the air, leaving the tension lingering among those present. A feeling of unease spread through the observers, prompting the belief that some secret was being concealed. However, this concern was quickly dismissed, declared as none of their concern, before the character decided it was time to begin the day. The atmosphere suddenly erupted with a powerful, guttural roar that dominated the space. An intense shout of fury followed, questioning the situation. The subsequent bewilderment grew stronger with further exclaimed disbelief at such a dramatic start to their day. The setting shifts to the inner ward of Kassadek Castle. A furious outburst erupted, filled with accusations about the character's supposed inability to leave anything untouched, followed by a harsh warning not to harm any moving object. The intensity escalated as another voice questioned the damage done to mercenaries hired by the inner ward authorities. Finally, the character was commanded to resolve this messy situation entirely on their own. A sudden wave of realization washed over him, making him question how he could have been unaware that those malicious individuals were actually hired by the inner ward. Frustration built, leading him to lament why the responsibility for this entire debacle had fallen upon her shoulders. The tension was broken by a sharp, commanding call for someone to enter the room. The figure spoke quietly, acknowledging that the person standing before them had been actively searching for him. Two voices broke the silence, one calling out a name, Nova. The other was immediately confrontational, addressing someone named Aaron. A critical voice pierced the tension, questioning a guard captain's constant troublemaking behavior, labeling their actions as those of a delinquent. The criticism escalated, suggesting that if the person couldn't find a suitable job, they should simply quit and stop making life difficult for everyone else. The identity of Nova was then revealed as the head administrative officer of Kassadek. Nova's presence was immediately affirmed, described as being exactly what one would expect from Kassadek's sassiest individual. However, someone quickly interrupted the scene, proclaiming that they had arrived this time prepared to fully address how one might win the favor of the ladies. They declared it was quite simple, simply becoming a special tutor, who was also the only married member of Team 4. The guide proceeded with the first step, advising that one must always ensure a gentle smile was placed upon their lips. Nova's shock was visible as she repeated his name. A voice breaks the tension, delivering what sounds like a staged instruction offer the lady a sweet and specific compliment. This is quickly followed by an incredibly odd comparison, pointing out that a bun on her head reminds the speaker of a deliciously ripe orange, adding that they seem eager to take a big bite off it. The lady reacts to this strange behavior, wondering if the man has genuinely lost his mind. She dismisses the outburst, stating that dealing with him only makes her headache worse. She seems ready to end this conversation quickly. The focus then shifts to a different topic. Someone reminds the lady that the mercenaries he defeated the previous day were supposed to be sent to Bold Castle, questioning whether they were truly mere mercenaries or if they were nothing but human trash. The lady immediately dismisses this worry, stating that even if the group were in one piece, they would still be dead weight. She sharply commands everyone to hold their tongues and listen, earning a quick acknowledgement from her subordinates. The woman declared that, now that the situation had reached this point, they would be required to take on the responsibility for the mess. She dismissed any arguments by stating that refusal was not an option, emphasizing that compensation and ownership of the problem were guaranteed. One individual acknowledged the terms with a simple agreement. However, they immediately pressed for clarification, asking exactly what the job entailed. The nature of the task was finally revealed. It required them to act as a carriage escort. A moment of disbelief crosses the speaker's face upon observing the sheer number of people escorting a single carriage. A contemplative hum followed, as the speaker considered that these people were mostly independent mercenaries. They realized this group was substantial enough to engage in a major conflict, leading them to suspect something highly suspicious about the entire situation. The speaker then pondered out loud, asking if anyone knew who was responsible for escorting the carriage. The name mentioned in question was Cho. A dismissive sound broke the silence, followed by the realization that the individual standing there was the one seen just 2 days prior. The man let out a sharp cry of pain as he reacted to the sudden confrontation. The man quickly recovered, protesting who dared to call him a weasel. He introduced himself by name, declaring his identity as Dylan, and then proceeded to taunt the opposition, suggesting that all their associates were still too vulnerable to handle. The confrontation continued with a mocking challenge, suggesting that perhaps the earlier beatings had not been severe enough. In response to this escalating threat, Dylan nervously begged his opponent to address him as Weasel or by any other title they wished. Suddenly, the mood shifts as the sun begins to set. A worried question arises about having to camp outdoors on the first night, but a different suggestion quickly calms their nerves, revealing that they might be staying in a small village nearby. The possibility of a local accommodation sparks immediate excitement. The characters quickly realize that if the village is indeed nearby, their situation might be much more convenient than expected. Indeed, the location is identified as Knoxville, a village situated on the outskirts of Kassatic. A new piece of information catches everyone's attention, prompting them to pay close heed to what follows. A sudden, unsettling silence permeates the area. The entire village appears utterly deserted. Whispers begin to circulate, wondering if everyone fled en masse due to some catastrophic event. This suspicion is heightened by the fact that there had not even been a famine in this region for 1 year. One person suggests a more sinister explanation, wondering if the emptiness could be the work of some demonic force. The suggestion is quickly hushed by another individual's urgent request for quiet. The person who made the demonic accusation is immediately reprimanded for speaking such things. The resulting confusion leaves the onlookers questioning what they just heard. As the tension mounts, one person attempts to call out to a superior figure, questioning their whereabouts. This is immediately followed by another person urgently shouting a warning about where the superior figure was heading. A desperate plea erupts, begging to accompany the superior figure. The subordinate voices concern, pointing out that they had only just arrived. He asks why the superior figure was moving with such haste, and urgently requests directions to a place called Sis Nisnize's village. A sense of confusion settled over the figure as they wondered where all the villagers had gone. They then noticed a call for a knight, shifting the focus to their immediate surroundings. A sudden realization struck the newcomer as they wondered if the items before them were meant for them. With gratitude, the person thanked the knight and even promised a greeting if they ever returned to Novtville. The moment concluded with a sudden, unexplained sound that commanded attention. A sudden, unexpected sound echoed through the area, causing a collective gasp of surprise. One character cried out in shock, questioning the mysterious occurrence. Immediately following that confusion, another voice sharply addressed him, calling out a derogatory nickname. A warning was quickly issued, cautioning the group not to look upwards. This prompt led to a question of confusion regarding the strange directive. A character challenged the preceding statement, expressing confusion and asking for clarification regarding what was being meant. Finally, a sequence of numbers was recited 111-00. The confrontation reached a momentary, tense pause. A voice called out, questioning the identity of Captain Aaron. The speaker followed it up with a simple, hesitant sound. The characters expressed immediate bewilderment, questioning what a Casadic guard captain was doing so far out in such remote parts. They returned the sentiment, admitting they would ask the exact same questions. Finally, one of the characters addressed the person as Lady Vivian. The characters commented on the feast before them, first noting the excessive amount of meat in the stew. One then added that if the meal was poorly prepared, they might have actually considered leaving their post. The mood shifted as another character watched the carefree individuals, calling them careless. This person questioned how it was possible for them to still eat so casually after having seen so many corpses. The character's voice was filled with horror, questioning what kind of sick monster would commit such a brutal act. A detached, cold declaration followed they were sacrifices. The figure continued, speaking with disturbing certainty about what the group had found. It explained that they were standing at a site intended for human sacrifices, part of a certain ritual. A knowing voice addressed the two characters, suggesting they looked drained and offering them some wine. The first character declined the offer, stating that alcohol only served to dull his senses. The voice then turned its attention to the other character, lightly teasing him. Upon being questioned about his own needs, he retorted with a playful declaration regarding free drinks and finished by issuing a warning that vomiting again would lead to serious consequences. Finally, a new man introduced himself by the name of John, stating he was in charge of their escort. He then immediately questioned the trio about their origins and where they came from. One of the trio steps forward, introducing himself as Aaron. He quickly assures everyone that he is not a mercenary like the others, but merely undertaking this journey for some sort of gig. The escort continues, advising them to make sure they rest and eat well. He warns that the upcoming journey will be much tougher than anyone had expected, a reality check that hangs heavily in the air. Suddenly, one of the companions points toward something in the distance. It is a beautiful sight, described as the flower of the East, drawing all attention to its breathtaking beauty. The observer recalls seeing the person earlier, a memory that suddenly clarified why she held such a title. They realized their initial suspicion that this was no ordinary carriage escort mission was completely accurate. However, the observer remained unaware that their current assignment was accompanying not just a notable lady, but also a knight of immense presence. Addressing the individual, who was identified as Lady Vivian, the observer then questioned her purpose for being present. Feeling quite stifled by the constant stay within the E-Castle, an urge for an outing finally struck. She recalled her father's advice and decided to head toward Bold. When prompted about her father, she asked if he was referring to the Lord of Casadic Castle. The observer cut her off, advising that the more she knew, the greater the burden of responsibility would become. A warning tone followed, mentioning the weight of responsibility once more. Suddenly, she heard a call out for Sir Ben. A sharp warning followed, cautioning him to only know and act within the proper confines of his station. He then addressed Captain Aaron, noting that the castle lord had sent his daughter to Bolton. The captain then remarked on the man's demeanor, observing that he appeared awfully calm. A direct challenge was issued, asking if the man feared nothing, even in the event of a demon's emergence. The man responded by suggesting they were not defenseless, pointing out that we possessed a knight. He emphasized that knights were considered the ultimate warriors of the empire, specifically developed for fighting demons. Despite the threat, he maintained a resolute spirit. He declared that as long as he held his sword and even a sliver of hope remained, he would persevere. His confidence was rooted in a history of endurance, He claimed he had always managed to survive against overwhelming odds. He delivered the final statement with a somber resignation. A curious tone replaced the gravity of the moment, questioning his words. He offered a seemingly polite blessing, suggesting that the best of luck would accompany her endeavors. The unseen presence questioned her curiosity, asking if whatever she found was truly that interesting. A joyous shout rings out, announcing the arrival of a Sir Knight. The crowd reacts with excitement, one person exclaiming that they haven't seen Horn in forever. Another person laughs, noting that Horn must have gotten bigger in the time since they last met. The joyful atmosphere of the reunion continues, filling the air with warm familiarity. The moment holds a sudden, profound silence. A look of utter disbelief crossed their faces, leaving the joyful atmosphere suddenly fractured. A ragged cry of pain escaped him, signaling a sudden shift in the tone of the reunion. A cry of pain echoed, marking the true start of what is to come. A primal guttural cry ripped through the air. Confusion quickly set in as characters questioned the source of the sudden threat, muttering about what they had just encountered, something resembling a zombie. A flurry of shock followed the appearance, with panicked questions and cries erupting as they realized the nature of the sudden danger. The confrontation erupts into chaos with guttural roars and shouts of panic. A desperate voice screams for the monster to get away, followed by another warning that they must retreat immediately. The monstrous figure pauses, emitting a confused sound, seeming momentarily unsure of what to do. Following the momentary silence, there is only a confused question mark hanging in the air. Suddenly, another voice calls out, identifying a figure as Boss Aaron. The figure of Boss Aaron was suddenly met with frantic calls. One person worried about his whereabouts in the middle of the night, followed by a chastisement for acting like a coward, and finally, a desperate question regarding the location of their missing comrades. The alarm only intensified when another individual confessed how thoroughly they were cornered. The situation grew more dire, as it became apparent that every single mercenary and soldier was already fast asleep. Worse still, there were absolutely no signs that they would ever wake up. A sudden realization dawned upon them, suggesting the group had been put under some kind of spell. But if that was true, it raised a baffling question: why were they alone, completely unharmed? The focus quickly shifted, leading them to a startling conclusion: the culprit must have put something into that stew. The realization struck them they had been given a sedative instead of poison. This meant their captors intended to capture someone alive, and that someone was probably. One person nervously questioned the situation, calling out to a boss, while another character simply gaped in disbelief. A moment of dread settled over them, as if they had stumbled into a truly disastrous situation. A sudden sharp cry rang out. A sudden command to step aside was followed by a declaration. The speaker revealed an intent to use the sluggish zombies merely as a warm-up act for something much more challenging that awaited them. A sudden, powerful exclamation rings out, calling for them to rise and shine. A voice booms, declaring that the sound is the military morning trumpet ringing out for dirty zombies. A moment of confused realization washed over him, followed by a shocked whisper as he realized there was another presence nearby. A deep groan escaped him, quickly followed by a sharp cry of pain. A guttural, struggling sound tore from his throat. He seemed to process the situation, trailing off with a soft confirmation. A realization finally struck him, conveying the surprise that he had grown noticeably taller. He finally spoke the name, Horn, as if acknowledging a truth that had been lingering in the air. A voice suddenly cried out a declaration, calling for a Sir Knight, that pierced the silence. However, this exclamation was immediately countered by a harsh voice that scoffed at the address, questioning who dared to call anyone a knight. Despite the skepticism, the speaker insisted that their understanding came from reading a book. They spoke of knights as being strong and wonderfully people just like him. The speaker's words continued, proclaiming that he was the strongest and the most wonderful man they had ever met. The protagonist, however, challenged the statement, noting that they were quite a talker. A sudden sound caused someone to try and stop the escalating exchange. Later, another character spoke softly, reminiscing about a great child they genuinely liked. A sudden realization struck, prompting a voice to express disbelief. The individual confirmed a major detail, mentioning that there was a vast library within the city, overflowing with countless books. They continued to describe this place, suggesting that the librarians spent their days completely immersed in piles of literature. A sudden burst of enthusiasm followed, expressing a fervent desire to take on the role of a librarian and spend their time engrossed in reading. A knowing voice rings out, remarking that for someone with a passion for books like the main character, becoming a librarian seems almost the perfect fit. The speaker suggests this choice is often said to be the ideal path. A stern voice questioned the kid about his appearance, revealing that the boy had been physically beaten by his father. The reason for the beating was that the young man had expressed his desire to become a librarian. However, the father had dismissed those hopes, declaring that the boy would only ever be a farmer, just like him. But that was fundamentally wrong. He exclaimed that he was no knight, followed by a sudden cry of pain. A sudden, sharp scream tore through the air, followed by a dizzying blur of movement. The focus shifted, introducing a guard captain from a remote castle. A sudden, desperate shout echoes out, "Boss." The speaker declares that they managed to gather all the men, having beaten them sufficiently just to wake them up. With a rallying cry, they urge everyone to show these zombies what they are truly capable of. Responding to the chaos, a monstrous groan is heard. A fierce command of death is shouted, immediately followed by an animalistic shriek. A somber farewell is offered, whispering wishes for Horn to rest in peace. The sentiment continues, expressing hopes that the person finds true peace in death, followed by a sudden cry of effort. Shock grips them as they realize the shocking truth: the lady remains within that building, prompting shouts of disbelief and alarm. A declaration rings out with cold fury, promising revenge against the perceived enemy. Their journey was taking them toward Bold Castle in secret, following reports of people from Kassadok targeting Lady Vimian. It seemed the rumors were true after all. They hadn't expected a secret caravan to be ambushed like this. Yet the knight knew that regardless of the current danger, there was something more profound calling to him. For a knight, there was no greater honor or joy than taking up his sword to protect a lady. Even if his foe were a wicked demon, he swore that he would still stand ground. A voice abruptly challenged the intruder, telling him to back off. The opponent taunted the knight, pointing out his tendency to run. However, they warned him that no matter how desperately he tried to buy time, the wound would not heal. The true danger was revealed. The dagger was laced with poison. The opponent chuckled darkly, teasingly bringing up a meal consumed earlier. They suggested that the target should currently be feeling pleasantly dizzy. Their condescending voice continued, questioning whether the target truly believed they stood any chance. The taunts intensified, accusing the target's tactics of being low and suitable only for their grotesque appearance. The opponent sneered at them, calling them a monster. A surge of rage broke through, erupting in a desperate outburst against the adversary. The character declared that they had reached their limit and was done with the confrontation. He struggled, admitting that his current strength was only at half capacity and mentioning how difficult it remained to gather sufficient aura. However, his focus shifted dramatically, observing that the demonic corruption present in the adversary's body had only progressed on one arm. A dangerous thought sparked in the protagonist's mind. He wondered if provoking the adversary enough could create an opening, allowing him to strike the human side. This strategic calculation was immediately followed by a sharp, questioning outcry. However, despite the internal plans forming, a sense of continued difficulty or doubt remained. A desperate cry echoes through the silence, pleading for a mere chance. The ensuing force is a guttural, powerful shout, suggesting immense struggle. The figure taunts the attacker, questioning if merely piercing a human part was enough to bring it down. The resistance sends out pained groans and then explodes into a final, sharp scream. The imposing villain mocks the remaining attacks, asserting that they are pitifully weak and entirely useless against his immense power. With a cruel gesture, he warns them to prepare for an inevitable end. A sudden, guttural cry escapes the defeated party as they struggle to stay upright. A moment of bewildered silence follows, leaving the character momentarily confused by what transpired. The action stops, creating a brief pause in the escalating conflict. A profound, commanding voice rings out, demanding that the individual accept their destined fate. The abruptness of the confrontation hit like a physical shock. The characters were suddenly faced with an unexpected presence, their attention instantly jolted. A clear declaration rang out, revealing a singular, driving motive. The figure stood ready, driven by the consuming desire for vengeance against someone named Horn. The confrontation escalated with a chilling command, demanding acceptance of one's inevitable fate. This was immediately followed by a desperate cry of anguish as the action took its violent turn. In the midst of the chaos and sudden violence, moments passed in a strained silence, allowing only the sheer weight of the situation to permeate the air. The sudden, aggressive challenge punctuated the tension. A sharp outburst of confusion and hostility erupted, questioning the very identity of the person standing before them. The lingering tension from the previous challenge was palpable, hanging heavy in the air. The silence itself felt like a fragile thing, waiting for any slightest movement to shatter it completely. Suddenly, the stillness was ripped apart by a deafening roar of pure aggression. The sudden, aggressive chaos that ripped through the air instantly drew frustrated cries and shocked exclamations. One voice roared in sheer frustration, while another character questioned who was responsible for such a volatile disturbance. A powerful curse was spat out, lamenting the waste of blood and pointing fingers at some random scumbag who didn't even possess the dignity of a knight. The focus then shifted to a menacing intent, the clear desire to capture the girl and fulfill some darker ritual before running out of blood offered as sacrifice. However, the escalating situation was interrupted by a chilling chant of vengeance. A single, questioning exclamation hung in the air, signaling that something much deeper and more profound was stirring. From the sudden silence, a desperate cry of vengeance pierced the air, echoing with a single raw plea for Horn. The immediate, forceful outburst seemed to momentarily halt the action, leaving everyone caught in a vacuum of shock. The tension remained thick and unresolved, leaving the audience breathless to see what catalyst would spark the next move. The tension that had been building up moments before refused to dissipate. The atmosphere felt charged, waiting for an inevitable rupture. What catalyst would finally ignite the next move? A sudden, sharp sound shattered the momentary silence. A palpable shockwave rippled through the immediate area. A chilling declaration followed. First, a command to heal up, quickly followed by the sinister promise that those newly repaired wounds would only ensure they could be cut open even more times in the future. The tension shattered with a sudden outburst of pure fury. A desperate scream echoed through the air, followed by venomous accusations aimed at one specific person, a perceived little rat. The target of the rage seemed utterly bewildered, questioning what was happening. Quickly, his confusion turned into a palpable dread, realizing that something far worse than mere physical harm was taking place. A grim realization washed over him. The draining effect was rapidly accelerating, making it clear that his life force was being forcefully siphoned away at a terrifying pace, leading toward complete consumption. The moment hung heavy with unspoken desperation, as the characters seemed momentarily stunned by the overwhelming drain. However, this brief lull was shattered by a cruel sneer. One party taunted the victim for thinking they could withstand a beating, only to deliver the final, scathing blow, asserting that the person was nothing more than a pathetic coward. Still reeling from the scathing dismissal of their courage, a palpable tension hung in the air. The taunt had landed its blow, but it hadn't ended the confrontation. Instead, the oppressive weight of the moment seemed to draw back, leaving only the expectation for the next strike. The challenger's smirk widened, suggesting that the ordeal was far from over. With a chilling sense of anticipation, they announced that there was one more round waiting for them. And with that final declaration, the challenger raised their fist, shouting a focused cry of determination directed towards someone named Horn. The air remained tense after the challenger's declaration, their shout echoing suspicion. The audience immediately began murmuring, pointing out an unfamiliar name, Horn. Whispers escalated into outright shouts of confusion and disbelief regarding this mysterious figure's identity. The focus of attention continued to shift, the crowd murmuring in varying tones, as if gathering more information about the sudden appearance of this unknown individual. The moment stretched, filled only with the palpable electricity of anticipation and unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air. The general sentiment among onlookers quickly turned from confused whispers to sharp exclamations of awe. The recognition was immediate. This individual possessed a strength far beyond that of an ordinary knight, marked by truly incredible power. Finally, one observer managed to voice the collective thought, pointing out that this person was anything but a typical brute, hinting at a deeper and more skilled nature beneath their imposing presence. The revelation of the brute's hidden cunning immediately shifted the dynamic, causing a new character to interject. One voice questioned his delayed appearance with thinly veiled annoyance, only to be quickly followed by a more dismissive reply regarding the wit of others. The tension escalated as another voice sharply addressed the initial critique, dismissing the accuser's judgment with pointed sarcasm and superior wit. The individual then countered with a flourish, claiming to possess the agility of a fox. They continued their account, detailing how the caravan arrived at the village precisely when its inhabitants were being sacrificed. This damning timeline led to a frustrated conclusion. It was blatantly obvious that the person in charge was the one responsible for these horrific events. The realization that the person in charge was responsible for the horror had been a stark, bitter conclusion. The tension snapped when someone accused another, arguing that everything would have proceeded smoothly if not for their meddling. Determined to regain control, the individual declared they would use this momentary opportunity to recover and regroup. However, their desperate attempt was met with cold certainty. A voice declared that the effort was already too late. Suddenly, a sharp gasp of shock ripped through the air. A chilling proclamation followed. There was no longer any requirement for their current vessel. The characters reacted instantly, calling out a desperate plea. One person urgently stammered for a halt, while another cried out in alarm at the mention of blood. Attempting to bargain, one pleaded that they would offer their own blood. However, the speaker dismissed this gesture with supreme arrogance, announcing instead that a far more ideal and equally delicious vessel had already caught their attention. The confrontation reached a sudden, unsettling halt. The sudden stillness of the confrontation allowed a wave of panic to crash over him. With an audible groan, he muttered about cheap swords, realizing with growing dread that the blade must have sustained damage during the intense battle against the demon. The overwhelming exhaustion finally seemed to take its toll. With a visible effort, the tension broke, and he thought to himself that it was finally all over. But even as relief washed over him, a single guttural cry cut through the air. An unseen force roared for his demise, issuing a final command to strike down. Following the terrifying final command, a blinding assault erupted. A powerful surge of energy manifested, launching itself forward with a shout of justice. The unexpected force slammed into him, eliciting a raw cry of pain that resonated through the silent arena. Wincing in pain, he struggled to regain his composure, muttering a frustrated expletive under his breath. He realized, with a grim understanding, that this adversary was far more formidable than he had ever anticipated. The weight of that realization settled heavily on him. This adversary was not merely challenging, but fundamentally overwhelming. A quiet, almost disbelieving breath escaped his lips as he simply uttered a single word. So. It was a devastating conclusion, whispered in the void. It seemed that the man had been completely consumed, entirely taken over by the demon within him. The consuming darkness did not release him. Instead, a cold, menacing voice sliced through the lingering horror. It addressed an unseen subject with intense scorn, demanding to know what happened to this pitiful human. The accuser then pressed, questioning what the protagonist planned to do. The tone grew sharper as they pointed out that such actions would have to be executed without the aid of knightly powers. A dismissive laugh followed, laced with disbelief as the voice dramatically questioned if the man could even rely on his own sword's strength. The mocking disbelief in the voice's tone was instantly shattered by a scream of utter outrage, condemning the man as utterly powerless and merely human. However, against the tide of apparent weakness, a fierce determination ignited within him. He managed to proclaim that he still possessed the power needed. The situation escalated to a moment of sheer horror as the opposition lunged forward, shouting an enraged command to tear out one disgustingly large eyeball. The immediate horror of the opposition's lunge and enraged commands did not dissipate. Instead, a sudden silence descended, making the moment feel suspended in an unbearable tension. The world seemed to hold its breath. The eerie quiet was abruptly shattered by a furious shout. The accusation rings out, demanding money back from Y, immediately followed by an angry declaration of knowing that cheating had occurred with the dice. The furious shouts and accusations of cheating left the air thick with volatile tension. Amidst the chaotic confrontation, a sharp realization hit someone. It was clear who was speaking. One individual tried to intervene, pleading for trust in their friend, but quickly grew more defensive when ignored. The heated exchange escalated until one person desperately demanded that Y hand over all of the money immediately, before finally shouting out names like Gorgai the Gladiator. The group was then summarized by name, listing Gorgai the Gladiator and Y the Gambler. Adding to the list was a third person, identified as Avery the Mage. The intense standoff concluded with a forceful declaration, warning that enough was already said, and the only thing required now was for Y to hand over all of his money. Looking back, he remembered that these people had once been his companions during their days as mercenaries. Suddenly, a cry of protest erupted from one side. The speaker protested that the situation was unfair, insisting they had won everything fairly and squarely before stumbling back with an exclamation of surprise. A familiar voice then cut through the rising tension, calling out to someone with a casual greeting addressed like a little brother. The familiar voice continued its casual greeting, suddenly issuing a crisp call-out, "Captain." The air remained thick with anticipation as the speaker followed up, questioning whether a certain bond or memory had been forgotten. A soft, almost amused chuckle escaped the speaker as they observed the scene before them. Maintaining that soft, almost amused chuckle, the speaker surveyed the unfolding scene before them. A knowing my, escaped their lips. The tone shifted dramatically. A loud, desperate cry rang out, filled with painful urgency. How can I ever forget? "Captain." The character's plea seemed to carry the weight of years and deep regret. The speaker's gaze hardened, the amusement instantly replaced by a probing scrutiny. They leaned in slightly, their voice dripping with expectant gravity, needing to know you haven't forgotten, right? The intense scrutiny lingered in the air, demanding a confirmation that felt more like an admission of guilt than a simple answer. A heavy silence settled, amplifying the unspoken weight between them. The sudden declaration broke the silence, a loud proclamation that startled and commanded attention. He stated clearly that someone had finally regained consciousness. A casual question followed, suggesting that the newly awakened individual felt completely well. Then, with a hint of knowing amusement, he inquired if they were indeed the captain of the guards. The tension hung heavy in the air after his casual inquiry. A warning tone sliced through the silence as someone spoke, confirming that despite their injuries, they were still alive. The individual immediately reacted, claiming that line was his own. Their voice held a sense of surprise as they stated that since they had been sensing the life force diminishing, they had believed their opponent to be dead. Suddenly, a shock passed through them as it became clear that not only were they alive, but their severe injuries had fully healed. The sudden revelation was met with confusion. The individual recalled that when they woke up, the other person was unconscious, and since they could not remember anything before passing out, their mind struggled to piece together what had transpired. The character paused, a slight realization dawning on them. They thought to themselves that it was rather funny, considering the circumstances, and then a deeper thought surfaced. It seemed that the devil figure was also lying unconscious nearby. This confirmed the thought that even that powerful demon figure was currently out of commission. Suddenly, the narrative shifted as a suspicious tone entered the conversation. The character questioned if this whole situation was perhaps due to someone else's machinations. The conversation hit a sudden, painful wall. A voice delivered crushing news: the person they spoke of would lose all memories and recall nothing. Despite the shock of the preceding revelation, an assessment quickly shifted to the core issue. Regardless of how any situation unfolded or who ended up fallen, the undeniable truth that mattered was their demise. This seemed to signal a harsh finality for those involved. Suddenly, the focus shifted dramatically. The speaker questioned someone's intention for pursuing their supposedly naive companion. An eerie pause followed, drawing attention to the woman, who appeared deeply asleep moments after her life had been placed in immediate danger. Still feeling the residual tension from the previous encounter, a sharp voice cut through the air, warning that the matter was none of their concern. This retort was met with a dismissive chuckle and a casual acknowledgement. However, the mood shifted abruptly. A new voice spoke out, expressing profound gratitude and suggesting a deep sense of indebtedness for having been saved. As the tension eased, a knight with formal demeanor stepped forward. He announced that he wished to introduce himself, stating his name was Ben, a knight from Bold Castle. The grateful party then offered a heartfelt thanks to Captain Aaron of the Guards. The captain simply acknowledged their words with a brief, thoughtful silence. A final moment of gentle reassurance settled over the group, dismissing any need for further worry or concern. The comforting feeling that had settled over the group seemed to linger, making any immediate concern feel distant and irrelevant. It was a quiet moment of peace. The sense of calm continued to permeate the atmosphere, making it easy for worry or anxiety to dissipate into the background. Suddenly, however, a sharp, unmistakable scent cut through the gentle air. It was a deeply unpleasant odor, the smell of real, rotting fish. The unsettling scent of rotting fish seemed to hang heavily in the air, a gruesome harbinger. It was quickly followed by a chilling realization that an entire village had been sacrificed for the grim purpose of summoning a demon. The sudden weight of this revelation prompted a questioning voice, demanding to know how all these horrific events were somehow connected to the recent attempt on Lady Vivian's life. After the fate of all the deceased was settled through cremation, the caravan subsequently turned back, setting its path once more for Kasadik. As the caravan finally turned back and set its path for Kasadik, a chilling facade of normalcy settled over them. They knew, however, that the official story presented to everyone was simply that Ben had handled the demon's presence entirely on his own. The truth, a secret burden shared only between the two of them, was that neither had witnessed the demon's true nature. It was a knowledge meant to remain buried deep within their private history. This careful deception was exactly what the speaker needed. If word were to escape and reveal that we had actually made contact with a demon, it would immediately trigger an investigation. Furthermore, the church would get involved, leading to complications far beyond anything they cared to deal with. But despite the dangerous secrets and the precarious situation, at least one thing remained: solid survival. After all the turmoil, they had managed to survive once again. Having found their means of survival through the preceding turmoil, the sense of precarious calm was momentarily replaced by a flash of anticipation. One character mused that such a successful mission should surely be followed by a significant reward, only for another to call out excitedly, acknowledging their boss. Their reunion was hardly calm. One person struggled to keep up, urgently calling for the other to slow down and walk alongside them. Another voice spoke with a tone of disbelief, reflecting that they had expected this man, whom they casually called a weasel, to finally perish. Yet, against all expectations, he remained alive. It seemed his persistence was secured by getting buried beneath a pile of corpses, allowing him to survive once more. The sheer annoyance of his persistent existence was palpable. One person repeatedly instructed him to get off them. They also realized that they had assumed this whole situation meant the end of their substitute mercenary gig, but a new problem suddenly presented itself. The unexpected twist and the mounting tension led to an expletive escape, marking a dramatic shift in their immediate situation. The abrupt escape led to a chaotic disarray, and the characters found themselves immediately thrown into an incomprehensible, overwhelming mess. A sense of stunned confusion washed over them as they stared at what before them. The world around them seemed to freeze momentarily, unable to process the sudden shift in their location or circumstance. Just as the silence threatened to consume them, a voice cut through the stunned atmosphere. Someone's casual greeting drew their attention, acknowledging their presence with an unnerving familiarity. The air, still charged with the weight of the unexpected greeting, allowed a single question to hang in the space. It was casual, almost breezy, yet carried an undeniable edge that immediately focused everyone's attention on its source. A sudden, sharp sound makes the character recoil, letting out a cry of pain. It seems whatever they are looking at is both repulsive and irritating, prompting them to complain about something being nearby, before finally snapping at an unseen presence with harsh words. The atmosphere seems to momentarily stall, leaving the characters in a state of tense, unspoken reaction. The tension breaks with a sudden, loud exclamation of frustration. A deep breath is taken, signaling a moment of internal struggle or mounting emotion within the characters. The ordeal culminates in a heavy, labored exhale, leaving the characters drained and exposed. Recovering from the ordeal, a sudden barrage of questions bursts out. The accuser demands to know if they are confronting the demon that was lurking in the background, dismissing such accusations as mere slander among the ignorant fools. A frustrated groan of annoyance escapes the character, seemingly resigned to this confrontation. The discussion quickly shifts into a medical crisis. Someone questions if the problem attached itself to the body while trying to pull it free, leading to the suggestion that perhaps this very complication is the cause of the character's amnesia. However, the demonic entity quickly attempts to dismiss suspicion. It cautions that its interest in claiming the body was not by the person's will, but by its own intrinsic desire. Its claim was simply a natural extension of itself. The creature, clearly offended by the implication, angrily dismisses them. It commands them to get lost and find another host body to infect. Furthermore, it threatens brutal physical violence, warning that if they do not leave, its hands will slice off the surrounding flesh. The creature's irritation is palpable, as it questions the implication that its actions are not related to its own will. It then emphasizes that transitioning to a new host body is not a trivial matter, requiring considerable effort and time. Hearing the mention of time, a challenging question surfaces: how long exactly would such a transition take? The creature pauses for a moment, before stating that the duration would be approximately 100 years, giving or taking a few. A sharp exclamation of disbelief tears from the characters, followed immediately by a surprised gasp as the enormity of the revealed timeline truly hits them. Following the sharp exclamation of disbelief and surprised gasp at the sheer enormity of the revealed timeline, a gentle, almost conversational voice breaks the stunned silence. It suggests that residing within another being is not necessarily a negative thing, followed by a promise to teach the person who listens. The remaining characters are left completely speechless, unable to process what they just heard with a simple exclamation of surprise. The silence stretches out, holding all the emotional weight of the revelation. The voice continues, asserting a profound capability that cannot be questioned. The realization dawns on the listeners, followed by an outpouring of shocked disbelief. The revelation continues to wash over them, leaving everyone utterly stunned. Suddenly, a sharp exclamation cuts through the silence. It was an unbelievable sight. A profound sense of mystery settled over the scene as they finally registered the source of power. An aura, unmistakably visible, radiated outward. It was an ability that seemed exclusive to knights, a force meant for their kind. The shock deepened into sheer disbelief. How could a demon possess such extraordinary power? The question hung heavy in the air, challenging everything they knew about the nature of magic. One person, momentarily taken aback by the overwhelming display, could only manage a single, bewildered sound. The immediate shock still lingered in the air. One person, momentarily taken aback by the overwhelming display, could only manage a single, bewildered sound as their attention was violently drawn to something else entirely. A whisper of disbelief formed, witnessing the staggering magnitude of power being demonstrated. Their gaze traveled, finally settling on someone familiar. There, the presence of Hopf appeared, drawing a breath of momentary relief from the intense spectacle. The realization was palpable, a silent affirmation that what they witnessed was undeniable proof. But that moment of reprieve was shattered by a cold, sneering contempt. A scathing thought directed toward the powerful individual in their presence, considering them nothing more than a little demon. The challenge hung in the air, unspoken but intensely felt, as an inevitable confrontation loomed just beyond sight. The intense buildup culminated with a dazzling display of lights, leaving the participants momentarily stunned and disarmed by the sheer spectacle. The sudden, sharp shout of a name ripped through the silence. A gasp followed, a whisper of recognition in shock. Then came the desperate plea, the fear that if their secret was exposed, everything would fall apart. The tense silence was abruptly shattered by a sharp, desperate call out, demanding that Aaron get down immediately. A different voice then chimed in, revealing that someone was present to see them, and the message came with striking clarity: they were from the Kasatic monastery. The sudden, unexpected revelation of the Kasatic monastery's involvement gave way to immediate panic. A desperate shout erupted, followed quickly by another voice urgently calling out for Aaron, telling him to get down right away. The voices continued, confirming that there was someone waiting to see them. The sender quickly identified themselves, claiming the message originated from the powerful Kasatic monastery. The sudden urgency of the situation demanded immediate action. They questioned whether a specific person was on the second floor, demanding they move aside immediately because there was no time to waste. The momentum culminated in an abrupt, sharp impact. The sudden impact seemed to trigger a burst of fury. A commanding voice, filled with palpable resentment, spat out words warning that no commoner should ever be expected to wait for a noble. The moment hung heavy with tension, only to be abruptly challenged by another call. This time, the voice was more formal, urgently announcing that Sir Ben demanded the presence of the person involved. Before anyone could fully react to the conflicting commands, a third voice cut through the air with absolute authority, demanding that they step out immediately. The sudden authority of the third voice had everyone immobilized. A low, mocking laugh then cut through the tense silence as one individual spotted a familiar expression on their opponent's face and called them out by name, identifying them as Jace the Halfie. The situation escalated quickly. One character demanded a momentary reprieve to prepare, telling the others to remain still for a short while, before muttering under their breath a curse directed at what seemed like a troublesome guardian. A brief moment of tense silence followed, allowing the gravity of the scene to settle over all those present. As the focus shifted, a question was posed by one character, addressing Aaron and asking if he planned to leave. Before Aaron could answer the question about his intentions, a seductive and playful voice suddenly cut through the air. The words suggested that he needed to return sooner rather than later, all while hinting at learning techniques for giving intensely pleasurable massages. Despite the tempting proposition, a dismissal followed. One individual declared that 50 coppers were unnecessary, dismissing the idea and urging him to depart immediately. Just as the moment seemed to cool down with the casual address of Haffy, another voice cried out in surprise, "Aaron, wait." As the moment seemed to cool down with the casual address of Haffy, and another voice cried out in surprise, a mix of fear crossed his face when he heard the word monastery. He quickly tried to downplay it, questioning if everything was really all right between them. The focus shifted to a deeper concern. He questioned whether the necessary payment or share for a demon would actually be delivered. Suddenly, someone stepped in, voicing a concern directed at him. They gently asked if he was truly all right with the situation and if he was certain about his decision, addressing him specifically as Captain Aaron. Continuing from the concern shown toward Captain Aaron, a voice spoke up again, acknowledging that taking down a demon was quite an honorable achievement. The speaker then emphasized how unexpected it was to insist on taking credit for such a feat. The response was dismissive, suggesting that the matter caused no fuss and that the individual simply could not stand it. The conversation then shifted as they casually suggested that if it truly bothered someone so much, sharing a portion of the reward would be acceptable. Understanding the request, the speaker promised that once the reward was acquired, they would make sure to summon the other party. They concluded with a soft endorsement of Captain Aaron, stating that he was honestly not a bad guy for a night. Having just left a discussion that praised Captain Aaron's character and promised future summons, the speaker cleared their throat with a dismissive sound, signaling an abrupt change in topic. The speaker then relayed some information, suggesting that the things he heard were troubling. Specifically, he pointed out a similarity between the demon's power and what is commonly understood as an aura. A shift in focus brought a new pair of characters into the conversation. One addressed a person called Haffy, inquiring about how much further they were. The response was reassuring, claiming that they were almost at their destination. The seemingly relaxed conversation suddenly shifted into a more confrontational tone. One character inquired, demanding to know the meaning of the term Haffy. The respondent, without missing a beat, replied with casual disdain, explaining that it simply meant the person was only half noble. This explanation prompted a harsh, dismissive remark. The character implied that the Haffy status was actually quite perfect for a noble family's illegitimate child like the one being addressed. Hearing those words seemed to incite a furious reaction from someone observing them. That person muttered a threat, declaring that they would one day kill the scoundrel. Immediately after, however, the conversation abruptly concluded, as another character announced that we had arrived at their destination. Having reached their goal, the group seemed momentarily confused. A questioning gasp escaped one person's lips when realizing where they were. The realization slowly set in, leading to the naming of their current location, the Solaris Church Chapel. The suddenness and nature of this place prompted another character to react with incredulity, questioning the situation dramatically. The moment of shock and disbelief quickly broke when a sudden, shocking declaration shattered the uneasy silence. A dramatic cry erupted, proclaiming that one character had been marked by a demon. In response to the revelation, another character's name was shouted out, calling for Aaron. The tension continued to build as a seemingly ominous voice spoke, indicating that someone had been waiting for the arrival of the person who was now being sought. The eerie atmosphere continued to press in on them. Approaching the focal point of this mystery, a voice gently commented that the person seemed flustered by the sudden nature of their surroundings. One character nervously dismissed any desire for exorcism, while another found the very air and place unnerving, noting how it made their skin crawl. Suddenly, the introductions began. A figure stepped forward to introduce Father Blyan, identified as the priest of this chapel. With an air of mock grandeur, another individual announced it was a personal honor to make their acquaintance with Brother Aaron, followed by pointing out a final person who joined the gathering. The scene remained quiet for a moment, allowing the weight of the introductions and the palpable tension to settle over the group. It was then that a title, resonant with power and gravity, was finally revealed Joanna, the heresy inquisitor. With the dramatic reveal of a powerful title, Joanna, the heresy inquisitor, hanging in the air, the gravity of her presence was palpable. The narrative then settled on a statement concerning two individuals they were both regarded by all as having unwavering faith. No script text provided for this scene. Suddenly, the focus shifted as one character noticed a specific gaze. She found herself wondering why someone was staring at her in such an intense manner. A moment of pure shock momentarily overtook the scene, leaving one person sputtering in disbelief. The tension escalated as a critical question formed in the characters' minds. Did this person know something they desperately wished them not to? The air hung heavy with unspoken questions, the lingering uncertainty hanging between them. If this person knew something they desperately wished to keep hidden, the truth was about to force itself into the open. A faint, drawn-out sound interrupted the sudden silence. Suddenly, a boisterous announcement echoed through the space. One voice loudly declared that the Inquisitor was bestowing a touch of blessing upon them, followed by another person who added encouragement to Aaron. The moment seemed to halt, leaving the characters momentarily suspended in a confusing haze of realization. Confusion began to lift, and a wave of observation washed over the remaining characters. One realized that what had transpired was indeed something akin to a religious ritual. Another character questioned the nature of the assault, noting that the intensity with which the figure attacked suggested nothing less than a formal rite. This assessment only deepened when a third voice exploded in outrage, accusing the assailant of being a filthy slave of the gods who dared lay hands upon him. However, despite his disdain, there was no denying the unexpected effectiveness of the attack. A change of topic was abruptly introduced, drawing attention to a report from Sir Ben. He relayed that the man in question had not only managed to defeat the demon, but, even so, he had somehow failed to claim the ultimate accomplishment. The mood shifted entirely as someone presented what was declared to be a humble token of appreciation from the church, meant to acknowledge noble deeds. The presenter finished with an ancient declaration that marked the conclusion of this ceremony. The weight of the ceremony seemed to lift, replaced by a gasp of surprise as an astonishing sight was revealed: the golden brooch, a precious jewel belonging to the Solaris Church. The onlookers all turned into knowing recognition. They already understood the significance of the item. The recipient, taken aback by such a gift, hesitated, unsure if they deserved to accept such a valuable item. However, the presenter laughed dismissively, assuring them that the brooch was entirely theirs to keep. The exchange, though generous, carried a heavy stipulation. In return for the trinket and the favor, the church requested something far more valuable: access to their latent strength whenever the organization faced trouble. The recipient then spoke out, addressing Father Blyan directly. Whispers of conspiracy quickly spread among the gathered people. Some spoke openly about how Father Blyan was rumored to be one of Kassadik's most corrupt and influential figures working behind the scenes, turning a respectful acknowledgement into deep suspicion. As the suspicion regarding Father Blyan grew, a jarring shift occurred in the crowd's fervor. Suddenly, a burst of renewed devotion rang out. People proclaimed that from this day forward, they would follow him with unwavering faith. This was soon followed by revelations that countered all suspicions, declaring him to be an absolute believer in Solaris through and through. Their shouts for the glory of Solaris erupted like a tide, punctuated by booming laughter as the crowd's mood swung violently. The renewed zeal was met with affirming cries of agreement, solidifying the atmosphere with resounding conviction. Meanwhile, away from the fervor, a different scene unfolded. Someone noticed another individual and tentatively called out their name, checking on their whereabouts. The first man, assuming it was the captain, immediately questioned what had happened and if he had managed to extort someone of great wealth. He then scrutinized the other person's attire, noting the fancy brooch and the absurdly shiny armor, dismissing them as pretentious. When this criticism was made, the second man quickly retorted that his flower-patterned scarf was not something to be dismissed before making such judgments, leading to a brief flash of defensiveness about the seemingly innocuous item. Amidst the lingering tension from their argument over minor possessions, a sudden and significant revelation cut through the air. A whisper declared that the brooch worn by one of them was nothing short of a holy item, embodying the divine powers of Solaris. The intensity of this statement only deepened when another voice questioned why they would not simply pay off the current tavern bill for someone. The suggestion sparked an immediate response from a serving worker, who cheerfully called out for another round of beer on the tab. As if concluding a minor transaction, the gentleman in question stepped forward, presenting payment. After receiving the necessary funds, one man gratefully thanked Charlotte for her help, concluding this small interaction. After the gentle conclusion of their small transaction, the conversation quickly shifted. One person questioned aloud if Brig was absent that day. Another offered a quick reassurance, stating simply that he was off duty. The mood lifted as the topic turned to Brig. One person teased another about their appreciation for him, calling him a fine man in Casadic. Another responded playfully, dismissing the comment but suggesting that Brig was certainly a solid guy, diligent and clean-cut. The conversation drifted into speculation. One individual mentioned they had planned to give Brig a feel-good massage if he were present, before trailing off with a sigh of disappointment. This led another person to musing that perhaps Hannah was the one who had learned such skills. The discussion soon hit a point of mild frustration. A sharp sigh escaped, signaling the passing mood and marking a subtle shift in their gathering. The overall ambience seemed to match the physical comforts, or lack thereof. The group murmured that the beer was too warm, sharing a collective wish for a long-lost taste of an ice-cold brew. Still lingering on the memory of wishing for an ice-cold brew, a new voice cuts through the comfortable haze. It's a sudden shift in topic, prompting everyone to pay attention as news begins to drop. The topic of conversation quickly turns dark and suspicious. It is revealed that swindlers have been making rounds throughout the city of Casadic. Specifically, whispers point toward the ailing Mermaid Inn in Sector 5, where recent stays by outsiders led to clandestine gambling activities. The sheer weight of the revelation seems to hit someone hard, leading to an exclamation of disbelief. It is clear that the rumors and the nature of what they suggest are deeply shocking. The focus then shifts abruptly to the mechanics of gambling. The staggering nature of an opponent's skill becomes undeniable when they manage an astonishing streak 6-5 rounds in a row. A collective outcry erupts, labeling the entire situation a fraud. The unbelievable luck and skill on display are too much to accept. As disbelief mounts, another detail catches their attention: the presence of a young child amidst the commotion. Amidst the confusion and general outcry regarding the situation, a collective realization sweeps through the crowd. Their attention is finally riveted back to the central event, who was completely dominating the dice games with impossible skill and luck. A whisper of disdain ripples through the onlookers, criticizing the brazen confidence displayed by those involved. The condescending sentiment deepens as someone vocalizes their outrage, particularly at the sight of a minor engaging in gambling within such an exclusive area. Suddenly, the authority figure steps forward. As a captain of the outer guards, they cannot allow such an insolent act to continue unchallenged. Their initial warning is immediately followed by a sharp cry, demanding that everyone stop. The captain's loud call seems to summon another guard, but the response is nothing more than a questioning gesture, leaving the true intent and consequences of their interruption hanging heavily in the air. The unanswered call echoes the sudden urgency. Before they can process the quiet tension, a loud shout breaks through. "Come on, Kel." It's a desperate plea, an abrupt shove toward whatever fate awaits them. Suddenly, a sharp voice cuts through the noise of the crowd, yelling that they must stop this gambling circle. The call rings out, pleading and frantic, lamenting their deep desire to simply continue playing the dangerous game. The frantic, desperate calls for them to stop the gambling circle echoed through the tense atmosphere. Yet, amidst the sudden urgency of the warning, a commanding presence suddenly cut through the noise. Before anyone could react to the warning, a loud, booming voice ripped through the air. It was an excited, unrestrained greeting, shouting a familiar address filled with immense energy. The sudden appearance of the person caused a gasp from those nearby, who breathed out names in stunned disbelief. The shock quickly turned into pointed questioning. Others expressed deep confusion at the unexpected presence, while one character addressed a specific name and questioned where he was supposed to be. Still grappling with the confusion of their unexpected presence and questioning someone's location, a sudden outburst cut through the tense atmosphere. One character expressed genuine shock at the thought that the other had given up on gambling, only for the reply to be a nonchalant claim that they were back, ready for just one last round. The subject continued, explaining that the recent influx of cash had given them renewed confidence, a new source of means for their return to the high stakes. A low, measured mumble drifted into the air, sounding like a decisive acknowledgement. A murmured "mm." "It is won," signifying either an arrival or a beginning. Suddenly, another voice cut across the scene. This time, it was a taunt directed at a younger person, acknowledging their reported skill with the dice and suggesting that they were quite good indeed. The voice's taunt hung in the air, momentarily shifting focus. It was as if the situation demanded a grand performance next. Suddenly, the challenger yelled out, urging for something more to be shown. A dramatic melody seemed to begin filling the space, a prelude of anticipation and forced spectacle that followed right behind the challenge. As the dramatic melody started to build, a voice suddenly sliced through the air with barely concealed surprise, drawing everyone's immediate focus. Another voice chimed in, noting the result of their match with a tone that suggested mild, calculating amusement. They observed the tie, expressing it as an unexpectedly interesting outcome. A different individual then spoke, announcing their next move with an almost casual determination. They declared their intention to increase the stakes dramatically, escalating the wager by doubling the entire pot. Having dramatically escalated the wager by doubling the entire pot, a new round of tension solidified. Then, with a decisive action, one participant declared their willingness to match the escalation, while another could not help but sneer at this sudden move, dismissing them as mere simpletons. An observer noted that the current player had grown overly confident, a clear byproduct of winning several preceding rounds. This overconfidence now led to him recklessly adding even more money to the growing pot. The silence in the room held, allowing only the weight of the escalating stakes to settle over the gathered players. The opponent was now subtly attempting to conclude the match, signaling that it was time for everything to be wrapped up. This mere suggestion played directly into the mind of the main character, who mused that such an ending felt entirely natural. He continued, believing the opponent would never suspect that he possessed the ability to manipulate the dice rolls using powerful magic. A dangerous miscalculation of knowledge and skill was now in effect. His initial confident assault warning the old man that his pouch was about to be emptied was abruptly cut short. A single, firm command commanded everyone to halt, immediately shifting the momentum of the confrontation. The person who had intervened seemed to raise a skeptical eyebrow, challenging the use of magic entirely. Their questioning tone was followed by an expression of utter surprise, as if they hadn't anticipated such an escalation. The old man, clearly distressed by the sudden accusations and challenges to his legitimacy, demanded proof, questioning everything that had been stated. Pressured by the old man's demand for proof, the challenger wasted no time in responding, scoffing at the request, and making it clear that such demonstration was a mere trifle. With a dramatic flourish, the challenger continued their confidence, announcing that the next number they would receive was also 4. They declared this result meant an immediate victory in the round and challenged the old man directly, forcing him to refute their claim. The sheer certainty of their pronouncement caused a visible gasp of shock. However, the old man quickly regained his composure. He dismissed the challenger's tactics as petty little tricks before suddenly pausing, realizing something important. The realization hit him as he observed that the person was, in fact, a child, confirming what he had previously claimed. Building on the sudden realization that the challenger was, in fact, a child, the tension immediately ratcheted up. The opposing figure scoffed loudly, issuing a harsh challenge, staking not only an arm but also all of his money, accusing the protagonist of using magic to rig the game. When those accusations failed to make him yield, he pressed further, dismissing any chance for confession and commanding a definitive fold. The character then shifted his disdain, asserting that the situation was quite common. He spoke of the disgusting gambling rings that frequently took advantage of young, failed mages like the protagonist, exploiting them to swindle people out of their hard-earned money. A new shift in the atmosphere followed. The opponent seemed to recognize a deeper power within the protagonist, musing that he thought the individual was nothing but raw muscle. However, realizing this person knew about something related to their group caused him to change tactics entirely. He then proposed an unexpected arrangement completing what was supposed to be 3 quickly. The unexpected arrangement to complete what was supposedly 3 quick encounters was met with a sudden, sharp blast of anger. A voice roared that they should forfeit all the money they had just won and run away if they valued their lives. The intensity grew as another character scolded them for never learning to avoid risks when victory wasn't guaranteed. However, the tension momentarily softened. One of them conceded that if they had known who this person was, they would never have acted so rashly. The thought trailed off with a bitter remembrance about how much fun rolling dice had been with the kid. The atmosphere grew thick with unspoken challenge. With a knowing smile, the individual then proposed another bet, asking if there was room for just one more game. As the air remained charged with anticipation, the challenge continued. One individual suddenly placed a substantial golden coin on the table, revealing it to be genuine Solarian gold and implying its immense worth. A skeptical murmur followed, making a dismissive comment about whether the pot was large enough for everyone involved. Another figure intervened, calling out to the group. They seemed genuinely concerned, asking what motives lay behind their actions and suggesting the participants might be crossing a line. The tension escalated as one character listed their observations, pointing out that the group was known to be swindlers and that a child present possessed magical abilities. Despite this knowledge, they questioned why everyone still insisted on continuing the game, suggesting the others must have lost all sense of reason. The last confrontation arrived with a pointed remark, mocking the group's loud boasts and suggesting they were surprisingly talkative for swindlers. This was followed by a sharp question, implying that perhaps their confidence masked underlying fear. The mocking tone suddenly intensified, giving way to a single word: afraid. It was a chilling question that hung heavy in the air, stripping away any pretense of confidence. The opponent then dropped the hammer, announcing a massive stake. They were betting all of their money and also wagering the hands of 5 people standing there. An immediate shift in tone followed as a warning was issued to Kanna. If she faltered again, a promise of pain followed. The axe would come down hard on her wrist. A challenging voice cut through the air, addressing someone with a casual sharpness. The speaker immediately pressed on, questioning why this person had chosen to remain with their current group instead of pursuing the traditional path of enrollment at a magic academy. The individual, in response to the implied criticism, simply questioned whether academic pursuits were truly their passion. The aggressor deepened the scrutiny, shifting the focus to motives of wealth. They implied that perhaps the true motivation was financial, suggesting a need to earn funds for academy tuition or enrollment. The targeted individual's expression hardened, warning the speaker with a clear command to watch their words and temper their accusations. His warning lingered in the air, forcing the other person to take immediate defense. They forcefully stated that they knew nothing about the speaker's true situation. The opponent conceded with a drawn-out agreement, suggesting that their suspicions were correct and that the speaker had somehow hit the nail on the head. A disdainful look crossed their face as they dismissed the entire exchange as a pitiful show of arrogance. They suggested that all of it was merely an attempt to stall for time, concluding with the bitter admission that since everything had been exposed, there was nothing left. The conversation abruptly shifted into a sinister threat, asserting that they could not allow the target to walk away from this confrontation alive. The sinister threat of being unable to allow the target to leave alive hung heavy in the air. Just as that tension reached its peak, the antagonist dramatically revealed a deadly tool, their die, before calling out one last taunt to the young protagonist, questioning if he knew any magic useful enough to chill a mug of beer. The young man, taken aback by the unexpected barrage of mockery, paused for a moment in confused silence before replying that he felt capable of doing such something, admitting his willingness to try. A sudden sharpness entered the voice as the antagonist pressed further, demanding to know the reason behind his curiosity. The antagonist's demanding tone hung heavy in the air, and then, with a sudden burst of approval, he exclaimed that something was excellent. A wave of palpable energy swept over the characters, culminating in a shout of recognition that someone had indeed passed. After the success of their previous challenge, the atmosphere shifted entirely. A new activity was introduced: a dice game. The rules were laid out simply, detailing that the challenge involved shaking a die in a cup twice, and the victor would be determined by whoever achieved the higher last digit when summing the results. The suspense from the dice challenge barely had time to dissipate when a sudden, guttural cry sliced through the tense air. A forceful command echoed, demanding someone's elimination. Immediately following this was an announcement that introduced the activity by another name: the Warrior's Wager. A struggle erupted, highlighted by a sharp, forceful grunt of effort as someone struggled through the chaos. Still struggling through the chaos, a sudden, desperate cry of death rings out. It's a raw, guttural challenge in the midst of the melee. Suddenly, a burst of victory rings through the turmoil. An intense feeling of accomplishment echoes as someone celebrates their successful maneuver. The tension thickens, and a pointed condemnation follows. It's a harsh reminder meant to make the target feel deeply ashamed of themselves. Building on the previous condemnation, a scathing attack continues. The accusation leveled against them is deeply personal, exploiting someone vulnerable for their own gain, an act that rings with utter moral disgust. This harsh judgment suggests that even among the rough edges of the medieval setting, a line has been crossed that cannot be ignored. The immediate aftermath of the judgment is marked by a sharp, visceral reaction. A sudden sound of revulsion breaks the tension, suggesting that those accused are physically uncomfortable or deeply rattled by the severity of the words spoken. The emotion escalates quickly. A clear expression of embarrassment crosses the faces, turning the pointed words into an undeniable public humiliation for all involved. The scene holds its breath, allowing the weight of the accusation and subsequent embarrassment to settle over the characters. A moment of stunned silence follows the dramatic outburst. As the gravity of the situation becomes clear, the scene continues its slow fade, leaving the true consequences and the reaction of the antagonists hanging in a palpable suspense. The lingering suspense of the preceding moments finally gives way to a hush. The environment seems to hold its breath, waiting for the curtain to lift on what is about to transpire. Suddenly, a powerful surge of energy rips through the air. A palpable force warns of an impending dark arts move, escalating the tension to a dangerous peak. Witnessing the display, one character cannot help but comment on its inherent dignity, praising the honorable nature of the action. They continue this assessment by suggesting that the opponent would prefer to confront and kill the subject themselves. The earlier suggestion that the opponent would prefer to confront and kill the subject themselves was cut short by a scathing remark: seeing him live was considered far more shameful than death. A sudden exclamation of disbelief ripped through the air, highlighting an unexpected turn of events. A sharp cry of pain echoed out, signaling a painful impact or sudden burst of resistance. The shock was palpable disbelief, washed over the character as they registered what had just transpired. The scope of the previous actions became crystal clear. It was evident that the individual had single-handedly dismantled the entire shark gang using nothing more than their bare hands. The sheer force of the previous confrontation left no room for pause. The debris settled, leaving only the echoes of incredible violence. Into this aftermath walked a man, addressing another figure with a tone that suggested resigned frustration. He seemed to point out that engaging in fights whenever dice were played was a habit that could never be broken. A sudden announcement cut through the tension. A figure was identified as the Butcher Shark, a notoriously dangerous killer wanted by multiple authorities in other areas. However, this warning was quickly dismissed. The individual's focus was not on his identity, but rather on something far more immediately important to him. The attention shifted again, drawing towards a corner where a hidden figure seemed to be lurking. A call was made out for the person, challenging them about their hiding spot. Upon being discovered, the figure emitted a sound of surprise, seemingly caught off guard by the sudden appearance. The moment of discovery seemed to shatter the hidden figure's composure. Overwhelmed, they quickly pleaded for mercy, their voice filled with desperate fear. However, a sharp dismissal cut through the panic. The person, seemingly uninterested in empathy, merely suggested that if survival and money were the goal, this plea was irrelevant. Nevertheless, an offer was made that seemed almost too good to refuse. They promised a pathway toward financial stability, a job complete with meals, and lodging, allowing the person to work their way into even the prestigious gates of a magic academy. This promise came with a peculiar condition: the inability to produce chilled beer every single day. The entire proposition was then offered with a casual, tempting suggestion, turning the discussion into an irresistible dare. They waited for confirmation, inviting the person to accept this newfound life and accompany them on their journey together. The weight of that invitation, the promise of a new existence and a shared journey, hung heavily in the air. They waited patiently, leaving the decision entirely up to the individual before them. A definitive affirmation cut through the silence, the character's agreement coming out with a powerful cry of loyalty. The lingering echo of the powerful cry of loyalty settled, still vibrating in the air. Everything seemed to pause in a moment of profound aftermath. After a stretch of silence, a quiet voice finally broke the stillness with an apology, or perhaps just a gentle address. A sudden burst of energy followed, accompanied by an exclamation about a mini fridge. Then came quick bursts of surprise and questioning regarding the reference to a fridge, eventually leading to the delivery of what appeared to be a bottle of beer. The exchange of the beer was accepted with evident gratitude, a simple "I appreciate it" acknowledging not just the drink, but perhaps something deeper behind the gesture. It was a moment of unexpected connection. The atmosphere, seemingly warmed by the shared drink and conversation, simply allowed the moment to breathe, settling into an easy rhythm. Suddenly, a burst of excited energy ripped through the quiet. The character exclaimed with overwhelming joy, declaring that they were finally able to see their friends again, expressing how much they had missed them. Still basking in the joy of reunion, their attention was suddenly diverted as someone called out a question about age to an individual named Fridge. The response came quickly, revealing that the person stated they were 12 years old. This smaller stature prompted a concerned reaction, suggesting the individual should drink more milk. The person responding to this comment used someone's name in their reply. The atmosphere shifted when a bystander observed the smaller character and questioned if this child belonged to the other person. It was a highly unexpected question that suddenly cast suspicion over their relationships. The character in question, faced with the direct inquiry, remained silent, their reaction unspoken as the tension mounted. The uncomfortable silence that followed the pointed questioning finally shattered. One person stammered out a frantic denial, attempting to dismiss the figure as merely a small magic tool or object they had stumbled upon. The tone quickly escalated when another person sharply challenged them, demanding an explanation about the connection, calling her something far more significant. The tension only ratcheted up as the exchange continued. A casual yet cutting remark was tossed out about the other person's current staffing issues, before an instruction was delivered to simply treat this individual as a new employee and look after her. A moment of careful consideration swept over the group. There was a lengthy pause, punctuated by muffled sounds, as if every word spoken held immense weight before finally settling into reluctant acknowledgement. The weight of the previous silent understanding suddenly fractured when a shocking accusation was thrown out, challenging the very possibility that such an adorable girl could belong to Aaron. A deep well of concern washed over the moment as she spoke, suggesting it must have been immensely difficult for the girl to survive among so many cruel people. With a nurturing smile, her demeanor shifted into one of protective warmth, announcing that she planned to take excellent care of her new little sister. Reaching out gently, she asked for the child's name, prompting Kana herself to softly whisper that it was her name. An enthusiastic gasp of admiration followed as she praised the name Kana, declaring it truly pretty. However, her joyful tone quickly pivoted, shifting abruptly into a teasing curiosity. She then innocently inquired about the girl's stamina, specifically asking how many mugs full of beer the newcomer thought she could handle in a single day. The playful teasing about stamina continued, leaving the atmosphere light and casual. Suddenly, a new proposition entered the conversation. Someone asked if they would be able to complete exactly 300 repetitions, followed immediately by an offer of payment. A moment passed before another voice spoke up, suggesting that perhaps it was time for them to get back to work. The view shifted, offering a glimpse into the routine life of Captain Aaron. It was revealed that his typical day unfolded in this very manner. The sudden peace was shattered by an admonishment to cease beating people up. This warning was followed by a dismissive, though reluctant, acknowledgement. The immediate tension dissipated, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of the warning. As morning broke, the rhythm of routine took over first. He had to greet the commander as part of his daily tasks at work. The next task required a brisk approach, starting with checking on the quality of apples. A casual inquiry led to him instructing others to grab about 10 of them and wishing them a good day. Following the morning greetings, his duties required him to patrol the local markets. This was vital work, ensuring the continued security and order within the castle premises. After completing his rounds, he received a heartfelt thank you from those he had helped. But the relative peace did not last. A sudden surge of bitterness surfaced, directed towards a certain wretch guard, hinting at deeper frustration and resentment. The mounting frustration and resentment directed toward the guard began to surface in words. One person pleaded for him simply to be left alone, arguing that his efforts were beneficial because it kept undesirable elements from roaming the markets. However, another voice questioned this praise, suggesting there might be other perspectives worth considering. The exchange of differing views led to a third declaration, marking another turning point in the conversation. The sudden shift in the conversation's tone was immediately followed by a desperate appeal. Someone, visibly struggling, pleaded using words of deep urgency, stating that what they had before them was truly all they possessed. The suddenness of the desperate plea was met with a confused gasp, leaving all present caught in an unexpected moment of shock. The lingering confusion after the desperate plea was abruptly cut through by sharp, menacing voices. One figure warned of severe repercussions for any lies or discovery of more coins, while another quickly interjected, urging caution regarding a known smuggler. A third voice then simply called out to the captain. A sudden shift occurred as someone proposed a deal, suggesting the release of the smuggler for 300 coppers, with an additional 100 set aside for their own keep. The proposal was met with enthusiastic shouts of excitement. Amidst the confusion and negotiation, someone offered a grateful thanks to the captain, sealing the immediate outcome of their exchange. The focus then shifted entirely, as a new directive was announced: mandatory identification checks and thorough inspections at the outer castle entrance. The sudden directive about mandatory identification checks and thorough inspections at the outer castle entrance seemed to slow the usual flow of life. Looking out, a quiet observation was made: there weren't many people coming through today. Amidst the stillness, a memory surfaced, articulated in the poignant observation that certain things, like the camellia flower, never fade. The mood shifted quickly when a question was posed, asking if the person had been sent by Scar once again. The response was sharp, a warning delivered with intensity: one must not speak that name carelessly. The tension mounted as the individual dismissively scoffed, then cut straight to the chase, demanding only to know what was truly wanted. The standoff hung heavy in the silence. The heavy atmosphere that followed the confrontation gave way to a sudden, urgent warning. Information emerged about a recent surge of outsiders appearing within Kassadek, signaling that their presence was far from peaceful. The intelligence reported that many of these new faces were deliberately posing as simple merchants, making their intentions difficult to gauge. Furthermore, these individuals were observed engaging in various suspicious activities that raised immediate alarm bells. To help manage the unfolding crisis, a letter was urgently presented, a communication marked S from the KIN. The message seemed to arrive at a critical juncture, demanding attention in the midst of escalating internal suspicion. The momentary distraction from the message was immediately overwhelmed by a burst of pain and sheer surprise. A sudden gasp escaped them, drawing attention to the escalating tension in the area. Amidst the chaos, someone quickly tried to dismiss any trivial conversation, only to abruptly shout out a cry of realization. The focus instantly shifted when another character exclaimed about the Shadow King's letter, signaling a sudden and crucial development. Another individual quickly gave a sharp command, directing the recipient to return to Scar and firmly instructing them to stop behaving immaturely. The message was explicit: they needed to cease acting like children and focus on the power of the Ring of Myar Shadows. The initial exchange continued with a challenging response, questioning the notion of immaturity. The tone escalated dramatically as the words hardened into an outright demand: stop acting like a drama queen and simply disappear. The intense exchange about maturity and disappearance suddenly shifts focus, shifting the conversation to economic revival. A concerned voice pointed out that if this remote location could attract more outside visitors, it would greatly help boost the local economy. In fact, there had been a noticeable surge of outsiders recently present in Kassadek. This surprising development caused a moment of stunned confusion, leaving one character simply uttering an expression of bewilderment. A rougher voice quickly broke the silence, calling out to someone named Quarter. The command was sharp and immediate: get up. The urgency continued, as another character stated that it was time to move and make some money, implying a sudden need for action. Before the urgent need for action and money could take hold, a sudden voice pierced the air, commanding everyone to pause right there. The unexpected command left the characters momentarily stunned, caught off guard by its sudden intrusion. From the mysterious figure stepped someone who greeted them with an overly charming inquiry about their evening, before quickly adding a dismissive comment regarding how strange they seemed, and finally concluding that this individual exuded an overwhelming stench of trouble. Witnessing the scene, one character suggested arresting him immediately. Another called out a name, de Lenoir, while a third expressed surprise at seeing this person return. The unexpected return of de Lenoir caused a ripple of surprise and sudden chatter among the group. Addressing the captain, one person then proceeded to make an introduction, stating that Mr. de Lenoir had been assigned to the Cassatic region by the Mozart Trading Company, mentioning they had only met recently during an identification check. The conversation shifted, drawing attention back to the captain. One character expressed shock and recognition, while another was so flustered by his handsomeness that they almost declared him a knight. Amidst the gathering, a commendation was paid for the character's dedication, noting how admirable it was that he worked tirelessly day and night. A quiet observation followed, simply focusing on a particular individual with just 3 words. The atmosphere grew casual as one character gave a directive, telling him to feel free to call them boss from now on. This command was instantly acknowledged with an enthusiastic affirmation, and this exchange concluded with another person giving a positive assessment of the newly introduced individual, calling him pretty decent. The casual conversation concluded, leaving the newly introduced individual praised by his companions. It was then that another person called out a name, demanding something from someone named de Lenoir. Hey, de Lenoir, do you have the stuff you gave me last time? The tone held an air of impatient expectation. The recipient responded with surprising enthusiasm, exclaiming that of course they had it. Following this immediate affirmative, a second person let out a gasp of genuine surprise and delight. The person who received the item immediately expressed profound gratitude, admitting that taking it always helped them sleep very well. Hearing this heartfelt thank you, the other party merely murmured a soft question, implying curiosity about the effectiveness of the aid. Still lingering in the air was the echo of gratitude for the aid provided, which prompted a soft question about its effectiveness. Before anyone could fully process that moment of exchange, a desperate plea cut through the tension. A voice cried out, begging someone not to confiscate an item, followed by a frantic assurance that they were not a thief. The conversation quickly shifted to matters of trade. One person addressed the other, noting that while they were seen as a new little brother figure, a crucial task remained inspecting all incoming goods. The speaker stressed the importance of ensuring nothing suspicious was brought into their possession. The subsequent exchange was filled with quick, breathless assurances. Multiple denials of bringing anything suspect were offered, almost preemptively guarding their belongings against accusations. The tension peaked when a character implied that if they were to break the rules, the consequences would be severe, suggesting the value of their violation far surpassed any reward. This bold statement was followed by a shocked, disbelieving cry of surprise from another party. All the accumulated scrutiny and accusation finally focused on a single, unexpected detail, a prominent tattoo that seemed to hold the key to everything. Still reeling from the sudden focus on a key detail, a sudden wave of shock washed over the observers. With an audible groan of surprise, one character immediately reacted to what they saw. Their stunned realization quickly grew into frantic alarm as another exclaimed in disbelief at the unexpected sight, urgently calling out for the captain and demanding attention to whatever revelation had just been revealed. As they surveyed the scene, a terrible realization hit them: the goat carcasses were in absolutely horrible condition. It was painfully clear that everything was rotting, teeming with maggots. Not only was the meat unusable, but the entire wagon would also soon be ruined. Suddenly, one of them challenged the other, questioning what exactly they were attempting to do there. The question was met with a loud, incredulous exclamation. Another character then stated that the individual they were dealing with was definitely quite something. He then recounted his journey, explaining that the slaughterhouse owner he usually worked with had died in an accident recently. This meant he had been forced to travel all the way there with a massive collection of animals. Hearing this news seemed to strike a chord, leading to sympathetic exclamations about how unfortunate it must be, and concluding with the observation that the person was truly super generous. Following the discussion of unfortunate accidents and overwhelming generosity, a transition began. A voice calmly stated that all right was now acceptable, followed by a directive allowing passage. Suddenly, a grand announcement echoed through the space: "Welcome to Cassatic." The sheer declaration seemed too grand to ignore. A moment later, the character echoed the greeting, questioning the location's name. This confused acknowledgement was quickly followed by a mocking, dismissive taunt, labeling someone a fool. But the moment of slight was immediately superseded by a powerful, menacing resolve. The speaker declared an intention to transform not just this place, but everything within it, into something much darker, something resembling hell. As the promise of a dark, hellish domain settled over the area, the conversation quickly shifted to observing certain individuals. One voice questioned the identity of someone named Delenoir, followed by another character commenting on his potential affinity for higher places, before concluding with an abrupt, almost exasperated exclamation. The focus soon shifted to the political climate of the city. Intelligence reported a recent surge in outsiders within Kasadik. According to this information, many of these newcomers were posing as simple merchants, yet they were observed engaging in suspiciously questionable activities. The conversation narrowed its attention, cautioning Delenoir to be far more careful with his movements. The reality of these medieval times was starkly laid, where one could either remain utterly innocent or face the ultimate punishment from the noose.